Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blab It. This week we are on episode 58. Time just keeps flying by, Paul.
I know. Who could stop it?
Exactly. Well, everyone, what Blab It is we talk about different types of things business related. To start off, for anyone that may have not been here before, my name is Glenn Ingram. I've worked in, around, coached, and helped people increase their sales abilities, particularly by learning how to listen a little bit more than they talk. Because if we can communicate, there's nothing we can't accomplish. Paul, how about yourself?
That's a beautiful segue, Glenn. I appreciate that. Hello, everybody. If you're joining for the first time, my name is Paul Geiger. I am a public speaking coach and presentation expert out of New York City. And I work with individuals and organizations about making sure they get their messaging nice and clear. And they are also able to overcome any of the obstacles that might be sabotaging the delivery of that concise and clear message. And our guest this week, Paul, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
Everyone, I'm Paul Artale. I am a motivational speaker and also a work-life balance researcher and a disability inclusion expert who helps organizations find the profitable and competitive edge by including and hiring individuals with disabilities in the workplace.
All right. Well, Paul, thanks a lot for joining us. Accessibility is something I speak about on a daily basis. So I'm very interested to hear some of your experiences. One thing that I find interesting that really seems to frustrate a lot of people I speak with whatever their disability is the fact that people feel the need to assist them or to treat them differently when, in my experience, they just want to be included. You know what, if they need an assistive device, they'll have their own. They don't need your hand unless they ask for it. Mm-hmm. So would you mind kind of discussing kind of your perception of that or your experiences?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's one of the most common questions that I get on this topic. And you have to look at it from a couple of different angles. And so let's look at it first from the angle of the person who does not have a disability and wants to intervene. And the question I usually ask people to start with all of this is, if you're seeing someone who you think has a disability, because they might not, or what is disability if we want to get philosophical, get meta here. But if you're seeing it and they're, I don't know, doing something, all right, let's use me for an example. So those who can't see me or can't see the arms, right? I was born missing fingers and shortened forearms, right? So like, this is my Ninja Turtle hand. This is my Lego man hand. And so if you see me in an airport carrying my luggage, it might look different to someone. That does not mean I need your help. So the first thing I tell people is to check their assumptions. Are you trying to help because you think someone needs the help? Like let the play develop, right? Like thinking about in a similar circumstance, if someone appeared to be non-disabled, would you intervene? Would you open the door? Would you, whatever that thing is, would you do it? So I think before helping on an individual level, check your assumptions, which isn't to say you shouldn't offer help, but I think if you can check that assumption, you'll find more often than not what the better course of action is. And so there's that piece to it, right? So we just kind of make these assumptions that someone looks different, they need help, right? I go to a buffet, I go to the ice cream thing, I go to scoop my ice cream. I can't believe how many people like, can I scoop that for you? And if I'm feeling salty, I'm like, yeah, sure, go ahead. I'll have 4 scoops now. And then I'll be like, I'm not so hungry later because I'm going to mess with you. But, and not everyone with a disability is as snarky as I am. That's just a special trait of mine. But so there's that personal piece. But then there's the part, like you mentioned, that person might, a person with the disability might have their own assistive devices. They might have their own systems of doing things. And I think that's also valid. And to understand that they, depending on age and a whole bunch of circumstances, already probably have things in place. And so again, don't make the assumption. Now, when we go to the workplace, it changes a little bit, because when we go to the workplace, the person with a disability may or may not disclose that piece of technology, that assistive device they have. Because again, it's all about the stigma, right? The idea of I need help, then I could be perceived as weaker or less than. And, on some level, someone might, oh, that's preposterous. But I mean, there's research that shows that, right? Like the stigma against disability is real, and there's conscious and unconscious ways that it impacts. So I think in the workplace, it's the other part where I think someone with a disability is less likely to disclose, because until they feel like it's safe to disclose, or if they have no other choice but to, it's a bit of a risk. And so what I tell organizations, managers, is that you got to create an environment where it's an inclusive environment where people aren't afraid to, or in some cases, it's a non-factor, because it's just the way you operate, in a way that accommodation, that piece of technology is just something that is, right? Like I was on a HR discussion not long ago, and someone said something to the effect of they were hiring someone with anxiety who needed, if things got really anxious for this individual, needs 15, 20 minutes to just sort of step out. And they are worried that this person might not tell their new supervisor. And my thought to that was, well, if you create an environment where it's okay for people to step out for 10, 15, 20 minutes just to catch their breath, just because, we've all been in that boring meeting where we needed a moment, then you just create that environment where it's not a big deal. It's a moot point whether someone discloses or not, or if they do, it's no big deal, because those types of precedents have been set. Therefore, it's not a big deal.
So you're talking about disabilities. The discussion started with the question about disabilities that are apparent, people who make assumptions and can see. But I've noticed in some of your posts that I've been consuming over the last couple of months that you talk a lot about hidden disabilities, and very often those are intentional, but it's and because of the stigma. Talk just a little bit about that, because I know everyone has an impression of what disability means. And you had a great graphic a couple of months ago of it's not just a wheelchair. It covers a lot of territory. Can you just give us a quick overview? I know I'm asking, as usual, a loaded question.
Sure. To put it in financial terms, it's like, are you going to pay on your way in, or are you going to pay on your way out? Meaning that if someone has a physical disability, that stigma is going to be pretty upfront, right? It's going to happen right at the beginning because it's visible, and someone has different looking arms or is in a chair, they're going to, that's going to start earlier, right? With invisible disabilities, right? Everything from mental health to neurodiversity, even certain medical conditions, the stigma occurs the moment it's discovered. So think about an individual who might disclose or becomes known that they have bipolar disorder. What is that? Which is something that quite often gets hidden, right? Like, and so thinking about that, how do people react to it? How do people react when that individual might have an emotional moment in a meeting, regardless of the emotion, right? Thinking about, so when you talk about like the stigma on that end, it comes after the fact. And the problem is a lot of our impressions of disability, hidden or not, come from media. They come from how we were raised. So they're not often vetted in fact. Like if someone's bipolar, it does not mean that they, every emotional moment they're going to have is automatically negative, or they're going to spiral. That's completely opposite the case, right? They're allowed to have emotions, right? So, and so thinking about those stigmas, and that I think for people with the challenge with those with invisible disabilities is that is the crux of when you need help, or you might need some sort of accommodation or something to change in the workplace to accommodate, your disability, your condition. And to do that, you've got to tell someone, and there's that fear, like it's like a trade-off, and it feels like, imagine being stuck between two really bad choices, right? And so,
Right.
And I think that's like a starting point for understanding with that.
Well, I mean, we have a very wide spectrum of different types of disabilities, different type of learning traits and things like that most people just don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
I remember back when I was involved with training in an organization, and because one of the people there knew me and was a little bit more comfortable, he said, "Can I watch you do it? I'm more of a visual learner than you just standing up and telling me how to do something."
Mm-hmm.
So if organizations don't understand different ways of training, they're always going to have issues with everyone understanding things. So
Mm-hmm.
do you ever talk to people about disseminating different ways of training when they're doing stuff, whether it be speaking, visual, all the different traits, so that everyone can consume the same information properly?
Yeah, my original training as a trainer speaker was as a K-12 teacher, right? And so, one of the first things you learn in the teachers college is Gardner's multiple intelligences, right? People learn differently, and so when I'm constructing anything, presentation wise, it's all about like, how are you appealing to your intellectual learners, your auditory learners, your visual learners, your bodily kinesthetic learners, which for those that are teaching, instructing, or even just running meetings, like understanding that people often learn or need to move, and then that can be really detrimental to their learning, and just to like running an effective meeting or training is really important, right? So I think it's a really good point that we have to find different ways of teaching it, instructing it, or having multiple modes to consume the content, which, if you're looking at creating materials for your organization, is it more than just a PDF, right? Do you have videos to supplement it? Do you have activities that people can do, and audio versions, all that?
Well, what's interesting from my perspective as a presentation guy, what do you think is the most neglected form of learning or type of learning that we, or rather, which is the one that most people go to? I know you mentioned PDFs and just doing something like that. But what would you say is the least considered of those learning modes?
I think it's bodily kinesthetic. I don't think we get people up moving and doing stuff enough. It's just we are. And I think things have gotten better, and I think technology in some ways has made that slight. I think it's made improvements with like the visual and the auditory learners, especially more the visual learners, because we show PowerPoint slides and video clips and things like that. But I still think we neglect to get people up and moving, up and doing, or even something as simple as it's okay to stand up in a meeting. And if you need to like just something as simple as that, it doesn't necessarily have to do with the lesson, but if you need to get up and stand in a corner during this meeting, go for it. And so I think bodily kinesthetic is grossly underutilized. And I think if you're talking about youth, as a former special education teacher, I mean, that sometimes leads to some of the behavior issues. I think in a workplace, more professional team leadership environment, I think that's where you get, oh, so-and-so just doesn't grasp the concepts. Well, they might not. They need to get that energy out, and what's holding them back from really grasping it is doing that, right? Or having something. I don't have attention deficit, but for me, it's important for me to have something to play with, right? So I sometimes will warn people if I'm in a long meeting, if you see me on my phone, I am probably just pressing the on and off button, or turning an app on and off, or I have not a fidget spinner. I have like a little squishy ball. I need to keep my hands busy, right? And I think there you go, right? There you go, right. I mean, and so it's just little things, but we don't get people up and moving it from much. As a presentation coach, the focus is always on the content and the visual piece. But if you're coming in at 8 a.m. and you're speaking to a group of people, it helps to get them up and moving. Or if you're speaking after lunch, it helps to get them up and moving, doing something to get that type of energy going.
Okay, so you're saying that you, as a presenter, As
Yes.
a good presenter, you set the playing field, you set the tone by saying that we're going to be doing some of this, so it doesn't come out of left field or surprise anyone. Is that what you're saying? It
Yep.
sounds like it's a hard thing to do, though, with more and more of this hybrid online stuff going on. Because I have to tell you, I always presented standing up when I was in person, even if it was just a small group of 5 or 6 people, because I just like the energy.
Yep.
Here, I feel like I'm nailed to my chair.
Yep.
Because we're in front of our computers.
Yeah. Well, that's a limitation, I think. And I'm working on, like, when I have a studio again, having, setting up my camera so that I can stand up, and having probably investing in bigger monitors so that I can I like to read comments and engage, that way too, so that I don't have to like go up to the screen and be like, oh, what'd you say, Paul? All right. So like that's good. It's a reality. So I think that's it. But I do think that, if you're doing especially virtual hybrid meetings or virtual, like a person, it's not even about you as the presenter, but you can tell your audience to turn on your cameras and stand up, right? Like you can get them involved. You can ask them to go grab an object. You can ask them to draw something. You can get them involved. It's different. And there's a lot of, there's different techniques that you can use to do that, but it does help. People still like to interact in some ways, which I was just talking to someone yesterday about how I'll integrate, quizzes into my presentations, like I use Kahoot and some of those programs. And I said, every time I think it's going badly, or I say, I'm not going to do that Kahoot quiz again, it just doesn't go. That's the meeting planner comes back to me. He's like, we love the quiz. Right. And I'm like, why? Yeah. Aside from like, I think a lot of us, it plays to competitive natures, but I just think it's the idea people are pressing buttons and interacting, especially when there's no physical human presence, in body form. It's a way to interact and sort of reach out and sort of touch someone in a different way. So I think it can be done. You just have to be really intentional with it.
Well, Glenn, we know some organizational coaches that actually send care packages a week ahead of the presentation, yep. And then do not open until day of, and then this becomes like Christmas morning. You talk about engagement, and that really opens up the door to a lot of really hands-on learning.
Yep. Yeah, it totally does.
Instead of just the listening. Mm-hmm.
People like free stuff too. It doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter. They always want something that's free and they can take home with them.
Well, and the reality is, when you look, a lot of times you're in large organizations and you're having a long meeting, let's say a day-long meeting that's broken up, 30-minute, hour segments. The information that people above think that everyone should have, people below really don't give two craps about it. So if you're not doing something to engage them, if you're not doing something to keep them involved, they're going to zone out and not be a part of this. So, and those are the people that typically don't understand why you need to stand up and listen to this. So it's always an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, I agree with that. We often try to overload with too much information versus focusing on what's the 1 or 2 key points that someone needs to walk away with and experience to learn.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask you this, because it's something that I've played with a lot over the years, and that's when doing a presentation, how much information you really put on the screen. Because in my experience, when you engage the eye, you disengage the ear and you stop listening to what I'm talking to you about. So what's your fine line about giving a presentation like that to a large group that you don't know how they're going to interpret or absorb the information?
Depends on the modality, but so my slides are minimalist. I'm heavy on images. I'm heavy on like 5 words per slide. I don't do a lot of bulleted stuff. In person, especially I always make sure if my room can accommodate it, my VTech, clicker that has the blackout screen button automatically on the clicker. So like the blackout screen is your best friend. If you're in a large convention center, they give you like those big clunky circa 1987 looking remotes that you got to use. Then just insert blank slides into your deck. And I say that is because you're right, Glenn, when the slide is up, the eye is usually there. And that's okay. You just have to be aware of that. And so when it's up, know that that's where the attention is, and that's where your attention should be as a speaker. Why is that visual up there? What are you wanting them to interact with? How long do you want them to interact with it? And then once they're done interacting with it, you turn it off and you come back to you, right? It's like, think about yourself as a TV show. Okay, putting my slide on of a cat. All right, shot of a cat. We're done with the cat. Okay, back to me, close up on me. Right now, I'm gonna do a cartwheel. Now look at the cartwheel. So like in your mind, you got to know where you want the focus to be, and if you want people to, if you are guiding people onto an image, let's take the cat. Right? Let's say the cat's drinking an unhealthy drink. It's a health seminar. All right. What's this? A cat. All right. What do you notice that's different about the cat? Like you can guide the audience with questions. So now you're participating in the learning with them versus just throwing it up there and talking about a cat drinking an unhealthy Coca-Cola or whatever. And some people might not see it, right? And people might not know what the heck you're talking about. So it's all about being intentional with what you're doing. And with Zoom, it's the similar technique. I think that the key is to know when you're going to be on camera. Like I flip between camera view and slide view and object in that. So the nice thing about being here like in a studio is I've taken away slides that I normally on stage I'm not going to take certain things with me because who wants to fly with it. But now if I want to show you my earbud case, I don't need a picture of an earbud case. I can just I can just bring it and show it to you here on camera, and that's a different kind of interaction, right? So it's about just about varying it up and being intentional.
Well, I always tell everyone when you're presenting, you're really in competition with your slides. I mean, I absolutely agree with you, but really the attention span on a slide is only about 5 to 6 seconds. So to go back to Glenn's point, don't put more than 3 bullet points up there. Don't make the font less than 30 in terms of, how you're projecting it up there. Just make sure that they can take in whatever the message is you want them to glean from the slide in about 5 seconds. That's all. And you're the storyteller. The other thing that I tell everyone is lead your slides. Don't let your slides lead you. How often have we been in presentations or meetings where people click on, the slide comes up, what we have on our next slide is, give me some reason to anticipate what is coming next.
My favorite thing to do with a slide is the slide is my punchline. So I'm setting it up and then there's the punchline. There's usually an image or a word, and then people laugh or they interacted. But I'm setting it up so that when it comes up, it's like the light bulb goes off or I'm going for the laugh. So I agree with you. Don't let it, because at some point when you let the slides lead you, as you put it, people are tuning out. They're just they start reading the slide. If you're one of those people that gives the handout with the slides, their eyes were already there and now they're super going there, right? Like now they're not even looking up, they're looking at their handout, which is why I hate slide handouts for the most part. Unless you have to be very intentional for them to be done effectively, but I don't like them. It's the same thing.
Sorry about that, guys. The chief bark officer reported for duty, so
that's all right.
Let the boss in.
You gotta let the CBO in.
I thought you were just giving us a real life example of
that's what I thought.
Learning. You were doing
bodily
it right
kinesthetic.
There. You just suddenly got up and you set the tone. So don't think I'm not going to do a cartwheel here at some later date.
I think my wife trained me to make sure I'm working. Well, okay, so let's talk about those slides for a second. I think, again, when you can have something that has a little bit of an effect, a little bit of, what's going on here to get the mind going when you're doing it. I do presentations quite often about digital accessibility, and I'll throw in a white slide from time to time. And when people will think, oh, what's he doing? There's a mistake or what's going on. And I explain to them, well, if you have this disability, this is basically what someone's seeing online because they can't interact with anything. Oh, okay. So, something to maybe create a little bit of integrity or, inquisitiveness, if you will. Do you do anything like that with your slides, or like, anything to really kind of grab their attention to lead into what you want to present next?
Go through the slide decks in my head now. I mean, I mix it up. It all depends on the purpose. So the short answer to your question is, I mean, I will, like I said, sometimes the slide is informative. Sometimes it's a punchline. Sometimes it's something to react to. It's a discussion point, but it always has a purpose. I mean, to the point where like, I almost don't even have a title slide. Online, you almost never see my title slide because the person's introducing me, I take it off and then I just come on camera, right? Like I almost see it as it's almost not effective unless I'm speaking to a room where people know me well. Maybe they want my LinkedIn information or something. But yeah, it's everything's got to have a purpose. I think that's the bigger point, is that if you're creating slides, what's the purpose of it and how are you going to use it? Versus, I like how you put it, Paul, letting the slide lead you. Okay, it's which we get from high school, we get from school. It's like, I just got to do a data dump on, the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, let's just fill it with a bunch of crap and let's just read it, and that gets you a B+ most of the time. So you go with it.
Yeah, right. No reason to grow, no reason to expand beyond that. All right. Well, there's a certain tone, obviously, to our promotion of today's episode, it being about disability inclusion and whatnot. But I have seen you give some of your talks. I've seen some of the videos, and you have a great sense of humor, and you really do integrate that into all of your talks, as well as we could go on for hours about storytelling.
Sure.
But one of the things that I'm intrigued about that I don't know that much about is this very interesting title. And that is your blog title, Life Lessons Learned from a Bucket of Fried Chicken. I'd like just a little bit of the thought process there. Just maybe inform us on the story behind that.
Life lessons from a bucket of chicken. Now I got to Google myself, Paul. I think I know the story. I have a lot of food stories. I know the fried chicken story. Sorry. I have one, life lessons from a gas station coffee. So that's the KFC story of, like, I like KFC, but I eat it like twice a year because, like, after you eat it, you're like, oh my God, why did it tastes really good on the way in.
Yep.
And like 10 minutes that you have like KFC remorse, right? And
right.
And so I think the inspiration of the life lessons from a bucket is, like, we don't always think about the consequences of our actions, and we always, it's kind of like that pleasure versus pain piece that we sometimes want to please. We want to go after the part that pleases us because it's immediate and it's fun, and then we don't always think about the after effect. And here's the worst part: then we go and do it again, right? Like, it's not like I learned it or I slipped off the wagon. You kind of consistently, if like 2 or 3 times a year I'm eating KFC and regretting it, that's not like that just means I have a bad habit, right? Like, that just because it's 6 months in between my slip ups doesn't mean that I'm overcoming it. So, that was just the inspiration of, like, how many times do we slip into habits that, even though they might feel good in the moment, that as we, ultimately they're not good for us. And how do we get out of that and sort of replace the bad habit or the habit that's not optimal with the habit that is optimal, and which is very tough. But it can be done. And it starts with, like, got to reprogram yourself about KFC. One of the best things that I like is that now they put the calorie counts on a lot of fast food joints. And so it really makes you think twice before you get even something like, you're like, oh, the McDouble is small, I can eat that. And then you look at it, it's like 800 calories. Wow. That's I better think twice about that. So I think about, like, in our lives, how many, what are the KFC type moments we have in our lives where we get into these, we put ourselves behind the ball on something that we swear we'll never do it again, but then we just keep doing it. So
you're not blaming peer pressure at all. You didn't have to, disengage with all of your bucket chucking friends.
Yeah, it kind of put a damper on my KFC Fan Appreciation Society membership. Yeah, but
I'll bet.
But then I joined Rotisseries, the Rotisserie Society. So that was, you find a different group of friends to help you with that kind of stuff.
Totally organic, so to speak.
Yeah, there you go. I just rewatched the other day. Morgan Spurlock did a Super Size Me 2 where he starts a fried chicken chain, and it's really interesting. It's interesting that he just talks about, like, the big chicken farming thing. I don't want to get too much into it, but it was interesting in terms of what's healthy and what's not. It's kind of revealing on that front.
So wait a minute, he invested in a fried chicken chain.
He creates his own fried chicken chain, and he shows you the entire supply chain of, like, trying to find his own chicken farm and tries to make it healthy and organic. And he goes through all of that. It's free on YouTube, so you can watch it right now. Super Size Me 2. I don't know why they really called it Super Size Me. I mean, it's not, he doesn't run an experiment like he did in the first one, but it's just about the behind the scenes of starting a fast food place, which in this case was chicken.
But what's interesting when you look at those calorie things that I personally don't think they should have on there, but when they have the salad, they never include all that dressing we put on there. Maybe
That's
the
true.
salad isn't quite as healthy.
No, dressing will
So
kill you.
I heard some rumor about some book about how the brain works or something like that with a 2-year-old. And I'm interested in that because my wife told me my sense of humor finally graduated from a 6th grader to a 7th grader. So I want to know kind of what went into some of that. If you'd share with us, Paul.
All right. So you probably talk about my book. Here's the shameless plug coming, right? So the 2-Year-Old's Guide to Work-Life Balance, which was really a blog that got way too big. And the story behind it is, at the time, I was like deeply desiring to be like the vice president of a university. Like I came in through like the activities side and was doing like leadership development and student government. I was like the advisor, all that stuff. And then as I'm going to like this conference for aspiring vice presidents, I realized really quick, I don't know if I want this. I don't know if this is kind of like the life I want. And some stuff happens at work that I talk about in the book that just really makes me think about that. But I come to the realization that while I'm away at this conference in Nashville, Tennessee, that I'm actually interacting with my family more than when I was at home 15 minutes down the road. Like I was having conversations with them nightly and like, involved in their lives. Then like the minute I got home and even took a day off after the conference to recover from the travel, I got called into work for some stupid minor thing, right? Like just thinking about like all that. So the book sort of goes through that. And at the time my son was 2 and couldn't say a lot of phrases, but he was saying stuff that was getting me to reflect on my life, probably clearly without knowing it. And so the book are like those phrases turned into lessons in each chapter, and just sort of helps people. The book itself helps people refocus their lives, asks you the tough questions that a 2-year-old would ask you, in terms of like, what do you want your life to look like? And why do you do that? Right. And are you, like, are you, so one of my chapters, like, are
Currently experiencing technical difficulty. I told you Michigan was a foreign country with regards to internet access, Paul.
It can happen, but I've also seen people disappear and then come right back.
Yes.
So perhaps he has to re-engage. That's really a shame. So we'll just keep things going because the link is live, and we'll go from there. Yeah, really, really interesting stuff that Paul talks about in his blogs and in his videos and whatnot. Maybe we'll get into a few of those, but really his sense of humor and his just grabbing story ideas right out of life experiences is really interesting. This will be one that we talk about, right, Paul? The Disappearing Act. Cool.
That was actually part of the gag. That was like, sometimes in life, what you think is going to happen disappears, but then you reappear and you're better off than when you started.
Right.
That's it right there.
Well, that was basically a live stream peekaboo. So yeah, it fits in with the 2-year-old theme.
There you go. It was like the weird. It's like my computer decided to screw with me because it just literally just went black, and then I pressed the button and it came back. Like it was. I've never had that. So first time for everything. But yeah, the book just helps you refocus. It helps people refocus their life. It's half of it's just the story. The other half is a workbook, just a bunch of activities that help you focus and get to where you are. Because for me, that's the moment where I decided I wanted to become a speaker and trainer and do more of that, and not, and really dedicate my time to that versus being an administrator where I was largely unhappy.
Yeah. Now it's interesting. You go ahead, Glenn.
Go ahead. No.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say that brings up something that I do regularly, and I'd like to ask each of you if you guys do this as well, because when you talk about that 2-year-old asking questions, and maybe it is the 6-year-old in my brain that comes out from time to time, I always try and sit down each year and look at what I did last year and what I'm going to do then next year to try and take small steps for those big steps. So is that 2-year-old asking a question kind of like evaluating yourself on a regular basis to determine what I'm good at, what I'm not good at, and what I should move forward with?
I think you could ask the questions on an annual basis. Speaking about my book specifically, and it would benefit you. The idea is really to help people pivot in the moment, but I don't, asking yourself, which I think like one of my first question I start any work-life workshop I do with is, what do you want your life to look like? Right. Life coaching, the same thing. Like, that's a question you should be asking yourself way more frequently than we do. because we think like we answered it once and we made our vision board and it's got the cutouts from the magazines and whatever else, and we're good. It's on our wall. Yay, workshop complete. But that changes all the time based on our life circumstances. Like this idea that I think I wrote something once that that like work-life balance is like your idea of it's supposed to change as you age and as you go through different parts of your life. Because why would work-life balance look the same to me at 21 when I was single and coaching football every minute of the day, and when I'm 40 something and I got 2 kids and a partner and a dog and a career? Like the two different completely different definitions, and it'll change as things go on. So I think that question can evolve. I think it helps to ask yourself those questions and revisit it. Just like I sometimes ask people to do I like people to do time analysis activities. And I think you should be doing that quarterly. If you're doing it twice a year, you're a rock star. Or so because the idea of like, how do we spend our time? You can do it once, but then life happens. You got to kind of keep revisiting it. So I think the more you can revisit the tough questions, the better off you're going to become, and the more you're going to evolve.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting when you talk about work-life balance. I was just watching a YouTube video on someone was saying that it's really not work-life balance. He said, ideally, shouldn't it be work-life harmony, where there's an integration of the two? It's not a one for one, and it's not sliding from one side to the other, though it feels like that. But they were talking about, and I know that sounds like nirvana. It sounds like a perfect state, perfect integration of both. But the idea of work-life harmony, where you don't have to give up a lot of that. And I wonder if the work-life harmony is something that we have more of now with hybrid workplaces and whatnot than we ever did, because of the logistics that have shifted so much. What have you guys seen?
I've seen the opposite. I think now that people have this, sometimes it's hard for them to disengage and leave, especially when they're working at home, to go from one room to another. And it's so easy to get drawn back into it. So I think it's kind of a slippery slope.
I think it depends on who you are and what you want. So, I mean, there's 3 different types of work-life, 3 major types of work-life personalities. There's those who integrate everything. So they like things to sort of mesh together, work and personal life. There's those who want hard separation, and there's those who are like, they kind of want it separate, but they recognize that certain times a year they need to put more effort into one part of their life than the others. Like I always use the example of like the accountant around tax season. It's tax time, right? Like there's not a good time to play indoor volleyball or whatever, right? But they know other times a year, family time. And so I think that plays into a little bit of whether the hybrid is better for people. Ultimately, what people want is something called schedule control, which academically speaking is literally what it sounds like. It's the ability to control your own schedule. That's this thing people want to say and how their time is spent in work. And I think to me, that's more important than whether it's hybrid or not. People want the idea to be like, if I need to go to the corner store and grab something during work hours, I can. Or if I don't want to take a day off on Tuesday, but work is forcing me because nothing's going on Tuesday, so everyone take a day. Like people get angry at that kind of stuff too. So it's the ability to have to control your schedule. To your work-life harmony piece, Paul. I mean, funny enough, I actually think harmony is the word I use to describe what work-life balance really is. But where I get annoyed, because it's really about like these parts of your life getting along with each other. That's really when there's disharmony, there's conflict, there's spillovers, all these bad things.
Right. But
where I get like annoyed is people spend more time trying to redefine the term work-life balance than trying to solve the actual darn problem. And so I use work-life balance because when I say it, everyone knows what I'm talking about, and I don't sound like a little fluffy guy, right? Like, I mean, I sound like a guy that like is trying to, like everyone's got their own work-life integration, work-life joy, work-life optimization, you name it, work-life harmony. And I'm like, who cares? I mean, like, if research showed that a stop sign should be blue and not red, that might be scientifically right, but we're used to red. So let's just stick with red, right? Like that's how we're wired. So I think let's just stay with work-life balance, and let's just focus on the issues that really impact people's balance. It's schedule control. It's to some degree comp and benefits. It's it's not having enough sick leave, time off. It's traffic that stinks and not having rail systems in place. It's not being able to, even pre-pandemic, it was not being able to work from home. I wasn't shocked when people talk about the great tsunami of the turnover tsunami that's coming and people leaving their jobs and stuff. I wasn't shocked because a lot of people that wanted some flexibility were starting to see it go away from organizations who are trying to take away virtual work almost entirely. And whether it's happening now or a year from now, they see the writing on the wall. They're looking for places that are going to embrace it a little bit longer. So to me, work-life balance is more about solving those problems. To me, it's as much an organizational issue as it is a personal issue. And I think the problem is a lot of the time it gets pushed onto the individual. Well, go take a yoga class, right? Go take some time for yourself, eat healthier, take an extra day off. Well, that's all great. But if the organizational climate doesn't reward that and punishes you for taking time off to raise your child because you decided to take extra parental leave, that's the problem. And it doesn't matter if you have the policy in place. If you're going to be punished for using it, then there's no point to having it. So that's my work-life balance rant, but that's my answer to the question.
Well, and don't you think this is no different than anything else in our life? When we fail to plan, we're planning to fail with it. I know personally for me, someone that maybe has a propensity to work more hours, what the way I've been able to balance out my life is for 20 years, I've rarely worked a Friday afternoon. Mm-hmm. And I have plans to go and do something at least once a month on a weekend type of thing, because in my head, it doesn't bother me. I'm working hard this week because I know Friday at noon, I'm going to go do this, or in 2 weeks, I'm going to go here. So planning to do that stuff really kind of helps you with a balance psychologically, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I think so. In your case, if you found a formula that works for you, that's what it is. I think finding what works is the key, and understanding what you need and when you need time to decompress or have fun, and making sure, I call it sacred time, making sure you have your sacred time and then you're sticking to your sacred time is goes a long way in this whole balance harmony puzzle. Because a lot of times people, that's the first thing they sacrifice. The thing they love to do the most goes to the wayside, and then they get burnt out really quick. And you can't let that happen.
Now, just going back for a second, Paul, to the idea of inclusive culture on an organizational level.
Yep.
Do you think that we are being taught at an early enough age the life lessons or the attitudes that need to be in place so we can accept this increased inclusion when we get into the workplace? In other words, are schools doing enough to create an inclusive culture? Then on the higher education level, are they doing enough? And I know a lot of them are regulated by government and have certain rules, state rules and whatnot in place. And then does that prepare us for the workplace to be able to really make adjustments to that inclusive culture? I
think education as a whole is doing what they can. Sure, some universities are doing it better than others. Some high schools or some districts are doing it better than others. But I think everybody's trying, and some of the debates right now are over what's the best way. But I think some attempt is good. I think one of the issues that in terms of inclusion, and I can speak from the disability lens, is that if you can teach it, but unless you're around it, it takes on a different meaning, right? So I can talk to about a disability inclusion to a group of folks who largely have maybe never encountered disability, or in the case of some school systems, the students in special education or students with, certain, motor disabilities that impact motor skills or whatever, or intellectual disabilities are sort of in their own class and almost never integrated into classroom, right? So when you have that, it's hard to really fully accept. It's hard to really go forward in inclusion if you're not around it and desensitized. Not even desensitized is the wrong word, but you're not used to it. It's not a thing, right? So I think about with me, my arms look different. My kids don't think twice about it. Why? Because they're around it all the time, right? Got a family member is a wheelchair user right now. Their child helps them, helps in the sense of we're going through this doorway. I better go open the door. Not just because that's just a thing, right? It becomes this accepted culture. And so when you have that, it's taught. And same thing with, you talk about if you grow up in neighborhoods where there's no racial diversity, well, then it's going to be, you can learn about it, and you can agree with every concept about racial diversity that's out there. But if you haven't engaged with people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different experiences, that inclusion gets that much harder. And I think that's where it can be difficult, where we can create experiences and create communities that really are diverse. And so that, it ain't a thing. I will say this, though, every generation gets a lot better with this kind of stuff. It gets a lot better. My kids are way, I'm biased, but I think their concept of diversity, equity, inclusion is far better than the one I grew up in, which was far better than the one my parents grew up in. And so there's progress, but there's still a lot of work to be made. And I think the other thing I'll just end in is like, and I don't know what age you have certain conversations with your kids on a parental level, but at some point you have to have conversations about race, and you have to have conversations about ability, and conversations about sexuality. You have to have these conversations with your kids to sort of help set the stage so that they're not sort of hijacked by these topics when they come out of left field for them at some point, that they're primed and they learn about dignity and respect and how to be an ally to different groups.
Well, I have an experience with my two sons when they were growing up, and this was really interesting. I didn't consciously do anything to inform them, but through from my dad, who was a great baseball fan, he sort of infused that in me. So I love baseball, and so do my kids. And I can remember my dad explaining what a big deal Jackie Robinson was. And he's saying, well, he was the first Black Major League Baseball player. And me going, oh, okay. Yeah, I get it. And then I remember one year we're watching baseball, our favorite team in the New York area, New York Mets. Everybody had the number 42, which was Jackie Robinson's number. And my boys go, why is everybody wearing number 42, Dad? And I go, it's Jackie Robinson Day. Oh, well, who was Jackie Robinson? He was the first Black Major League Baseball player. And they said, why?
Yep. Yeah.
And I said, well, they wouldn't let any of the Black players play prior to him. And again, they said, why?
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep.
Well, I have a question with regards to bias with regards to people with disabilities, because in my day job, I'm constantly dealing with businesses that are sued by a small percentage of people with disabilities, whether it be with regards to access to their physical business, to their website and stuff like that. And I'm constantly trying to educate the business community on, this is a small percentage, but this is what real people that maybe have a visual disability, a motor skill disability, a hearing disability, this is what they really want, and this is how they are. And the fact that people with vision disabilities are kind of a small, tight-knit community, as well as people with MS, MD, and things like this.
Yep.
So just by including them, making it accessible, you open up your business to these communities that would love to support someone that supports them. And that it's a small percentage of people that are filing these lawsuits. Most people with disabilities just want to be included. They don't want to be able to use this for financial gains. So have you encountered any of that type of perceptions and things like that? And maybe some misperceptions based upon, like all of us, a small percentage of people give someone a bad name?
Sure. Well, I mean, I don't know anything about the lawsuits, but in terms of, I think you said, people want to support businesses and organizations that, accept them. And, here's a stat. Persons with disabilities represent $1 trillion as a market. Like, it's $1 trillion worth of buying power. So there's a business case to be made right off the bat. There's also, by making let's say your website or your site more disability inclusive, you're not just benefiting people with disabilities, you're benefiting people in general. Think of closed captioning. Okay. Closed captioning doesn't just benefit someone with an auditory disability. All right. It can also benefit someone who English is not their first language. And so, you're watching something. So, I mean, they can actually read and get context clues. We have closed caption on in our house, and no one has a hearing impairment, but it just became a thing. I think my wife likes it. And sometimes, if the kids are being too loud, she can just read what's going on screen or whatever. Right. And I can tell you just by reading it, what goes on, and try it one time, watch a show or a movie with the captions on, and you'll learn things about the context because of the way it's written. Think, oh, that totally gives me a new insight. It's like having a new experience. So we know things like that benefit. We know that when we have doors that have, the automatic open button, whether it's sensor, press the button. Yes, obviously for wheelchair users, those with mobility, disabilities that involve mobility, clearly a benefit to them. But think about, have you ever had a wheel, carry a large box or something, and have we ever used that button for ourselves, right? And that's not to say we should put up more of these doors to benefit us when we lift a heavy box, but just the idea that like there is a residual effect, right? Think about elevators. Think about there's a residual effect. Having bigger meeting spaces, new designs that involve, you can have dimmers on demand or more access to dimmers, right? So think about all these little things that benefit those with the disability, but then also add an added benefit to those who just happen to be there, right? And so I think it's just good, smart practice. I think we have to recognize, Paul, to earlier question about like the education system, all that, we need to recognize that like the system, the world we live in was largely created by those that were able-bodied, right? So they never gave thoughts to disability. We created websites without thoughts of disability. We created buildings without thoughts of disability. We created cars without thoughts of disability, right? And we've had to retrofit a lot of that. And now we're at a phase where like retrofitting is not good enough in a lot of cases, that we just need to like create it anew, which is like whenever a business is creating a new building, like that's the best time to get all this stuff in, right? Because you don't have to, add some weird conference room to the back of your building or an elevator, have someone go through different things. So I think it's just good business sense. And the other part is like, in terms of lawsuits and all that is, I mean, disability complaints are third on the EEOC list for lawsuits, like third. So, and they're valid. So thinking about, that there's something you need to do it because it's the right thing, do it because it's profitable, and do it because you need to protect your organization. If you can't buy into those three reasons, then I think you're in a world of hurt.
Well, and you mentioned 25% real quick, if I could real quick, Paul. I look at long-term disabilities, short-term disabilities, and environmental disabilities. Mm-hmm. So I could have a broken arm. I could have a broken collarbone. It's going to make me hard to open that door.
Yep.
We could be having a pint somewhere, and at a place that's kind of loud. And if there's no closed captioning on the TV, we can't understand what's going on there because you can't hear it. And the example I give is, I can't. I'm kind of wanting to wait until my daughters have children, but could you imagine having a child on one arm and trying to navigate this phone on a website that's not built for a phone? I mean, there's a lot of things like this that businesses, I don't think, understand the scope of how much it would increase their business by doing things the right way for a multitude of people.
Yep. 100%.
And it is, you bring up really good points, both of you, about the added, those moments where this helps everyone, where it becomes a convenience too in those moments. But isn't there a psychological effect of creating an environment, especially an inclusive culture, a psychological effect of there being more of a safety zone psychologically in the culture that exists within the workplace?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the early part of our discussion of how do you create inclusive culture, right? A lot of these little things we've been talking about add to that, right? And so that's where that safety zone comes in, and knowing that if the organization has designed things to be inclusive and is willing to hear things and then take action, that goes a long way in creating a safe zone, creating just a place that they know is welcoming. And then, from again, going to the business side of it, that's a talent. That's both a business, word of mouth business strategy, and also a talent recruitment and retention strategy, right? Or positive effect, I should say. That the idea that you should come work here, they're accessible, right? You should come work here. They treat folks right. They listen, disability or not. They listen to employees. They listen to their customers when they have a suggestion, not even a complaint. When they have a suggestion of how to get better, they listen. I remember working. I had a group hired me to talk about disability, and they had like a disability group in this one particular college campus. And the person that started it was was visually impaired, and there was no braille signs anywhere. And the fight this individual had to get braille, just placards on classrooms and in bathrooms and things like that, was so immense. And I'm like, what message does that send to potential students with disabilities when something so, to me, is relatively minor in terms of like, that's an easy fix. That's you find who can print them and you get them done, right? But the fight was so intense in that first year of this organization's life to get this really simple accommodation that, like, what's the message it sent? And when you bring students come in on recruitment tours or they talk to other students, the truth comes out one way or the other.
Well, and you mentioned the closed captionings. I know I have a good friend that's an audiologist. And as men, we're kind of hard-headed and think we can do anything. And typically, they've shown studies that a guy will live with a hearing disability for 5 to 6 years because he doesn't want to admit that he has an inefficiency. So if without those closed captionings, we can't understand what's going on. And I know I've learned a lot the last year. I didn't realize it until all these masks, how much I depend on looking at lips to hear. Never dreamt about it. And now it's kind of fun across the room. I can kind of read lips a little bit. But you just never realized those two went together.
Yeah. Well, a fun statistic, and with disability, is one I quote often, is that 55% of the workforce will have a disability by the time they retire. So thinking about that. So thinking that's not including employees with disabilities already in the workforce, like starting, talking about like someone that doesn't have an identifiable disability, not diagnosed. By the time they retire, more than half will have something. So again, it just makes a lot of sense on a lot of levels. And if companies don't have a coming into disability plan to help their employees transition into it and help them with resources, and again, having accommodations and just being open to doing things differently, then I think they're the ones that in the long term are not going to be as successful compared to the ones that do, which we do know from different studies that organizations that are disability inclusive are more profitable, bring in more revenue. Like I always say, good numbers go up, bad numbers go down. Like that. There's, Accenture does a lot of good research on that.
Yeah. It's not just best practices and just, a good thing for the world, because it's a matter of inclusion is going to improve the bottom line too.
Yeah. Yeah. Diversity in general is good for the bottom. I mean, it's more than just a humanitarian social justice piece. It's definitely that. So I'm not downplaying that, but I mean, there is, when people talk about like the benefits of a diverse team, they're not just talking about it's a nice thing. Like teams that are diverse and made up of different identities perform better than those who don't. And there's lots of research that supports that notion. It's not just like it looks nice. It's actually it's rooted. So again, it's get with it or be left behind.
Well, I didn't know coming into this that I was going to get to deal with snarkiness and team football comments. So that means you're probably going to have to come back and visit us again, because I can relate to that well, Paul.
Anytime. My snark is always ready.
Yeah, good. This was a fantastic episode. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
If anybody would want to reach out to you, Paul, what's the best way for them to get in contact?
Go to my website, www.paulartale, that's PAULARTALE.com, and fill out the contact form, or come find me on LinkedIn and other social media platforms and come say hello.
All right. Well, thank you very much, guys. Cool. As anyone that sees me online understands that if you don't make everything in your life inclusive, your business, your personal life, you're going to miss out on some very important factors. So this is definitely something that we need to talk about on a regular basis. Thank you so much again for coming, everyone. We'll see you same time next week, same places. Have a good week, everybody.